The cold, heavy metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around my frail wrists. The sound echoed through the grand living room of the mansion I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. Two massive paramedics in crisp white uniforms pushed my shoulders down against the rough canvas of a medical stretcher. I was being erased from my own life. I did not scream. I did not thrash around like a madwoman. I simply lay there, feeling the thick leather straps dig into my chest, and stared at the two men standing calmly by the marble fireplace. My husband of 30 years, Arthur, and my eldest son, Julian. They watched the paramedics bind me with absolute silence. Arthur held a crystal glass of expensive whiskey in his right hand. He took a slow sip. His face was a mask of perfect, rehearsed sorrow. Julian stood beside him, clutching a thick manila folder against his tailored designer suit, the very same suit I bought for his birthday just 1 month ago. "You do not have to use force," I said. My voice was eerily calm. "I am perfectly lucid." The lead paramedic did not even look at my eyes. He tightened the heavy buckle right across my legs. "Standard procedure for involuntary psychiatric holds. Ma'am, please try to relax. Involuntary psychiatric hold." The words hung in the suffocating air like a death sentence. Julian stepped forward. His polished Italian shoes clicked rhythmically against the imported hardwood floor. He handed a single sheet of paper to the paramedic. I strained my neck to see it. It was a formal medical evaluation form. I caught a glimpse of the bold red stamp at the bottom of the page. "Severe paranoid dementia with violent tendencies." Signed by a Dr. Elias Vance. I had never heard that name in my entire life. I had not seen a doctor in 8 long months. And yet, here was a piece of paper legally declaring me insane. Signed, sealed, and delivered right into my own living room. A bitter, metallic taste flooded my mouth. It was the taste of a monumental betrayal. 30 years. For 30 long years, I played the devoted, quiet wife. But I was never just a housewife. Decades ago, I was the most ruthless financial architect on Wall Street. I built the massive family trust fund from absolutely nothing. I designed the complex investment portfolios. I mapped out the aggressive corporate acquisitions. I created an empire of immense wealth. But society loves a successful man, not a powerful woman. So, I stepped into the shadows. I let Arthur take the prestigious title of Chief Executive Officer. I let him take the applause, the magazine covers, and the total credit. I did it out of love. I wiped Julian's tears when he was a boy, paid off his massive gambling debts in secret, and secured his high position on the board of directors. I made them kings. And this was my reward. They were throwing me away like defective machinery because they finally wanted the master keys to the vault. "Mother, please do not make this harder than it already is," Julian said. His voice trembled, playing the part of the grieving son perfectly. "You have been seeing things. You have been saying terrible things. We are doing this for your own good. You need professional help." I looked into my son's eyes. I searched for a single shred of guilt, a tiny flicker of hesitation. There was absolutely nothing, only a cold, calculated greed. He was looking at me, but he was seeing dollar signs. "Who is Dr. Vance?" "Julian," I asked softly, "how much money did you pay him to write that fiction?" Arthur let out a heavy sigh and walked toward the stretcher. He bent down, bringing his handsome face dangerously close to mine. I could smell the aged liquor on his breath, mixed entirely with the stench of his deep cowardice. "Evelyn, darling, Your mind is completely gone," Arthur whispered. His tone was dripping with fake pity. "You are tired. The trust fund. The massive properties. It is far too much pressure for your fragile state. Let Julian and me handle the heavy burdens of the estate. You just need to rest in a quiet place. You will never touch the trust fund." I hissed, glaring right through his hollow soul. "The safety protocols require my physical authorization. You are absolute fools if you think this pathetic theatrical performance will magically give you my money." Arthur smiled. It was a chilling, victorious smile. "We have power of attorney documents ready. My love, once you are safely medicated, you will sign them, or you will stay in that locked facility until you forget your own name." The paramedics lifted the stretcher. The sudden movement made my stomach drop. They wheeled me toward the massive oak front doors. The beautiful doors I had personally chosen when we built this sanctuary. "Take her out through the service entrance," Julian commanded sharply. "We cannot risk the wealthy neighbors seeing this embarrassing spectacle." The service entrance, like taking out the evening trash. The night air was freezing as they loaded me into the back of the waiting ambulance. The heavy metal doors slammed shut, plunging me into a suffocating darkness. The engine roared to life. The siren wailed, cutting through the dead silence of the elite neighborhood. I was trapped in a moving metal box, completely stripped of my dignity, my legal rights, and my voice. As the ambulance sped through the winding mountain roads, my heart hammered against my ribs. I realized the terrifying brilliance of their sinister plan. If I screamed, I was crazy. If I fought back, I was violent. If I tried to explain the massive financial conspiracy to the medical nurses, I was clearly suffering from paranoid delusions. They had locked me in a perfect psychological prison. I closed my eyes and focused on my slow breathing. I had to suppress the overwhelming urge to cry out in pure agony. Tears were a luxury I could no longer afford. I needed my mind sharp. I was Evelyn Sterling, the unseen architect. They thought I was a fragile old woman who would simply break under the crushing pressure of a psychiatric ward. They had forgotten who actually built their entire world. The ambulance finally lurched to a sudden halt. The rear doors swung open, revealing the imposing, fortress-like structure of the Oak Ridge Private Sanitarium. It did not look like a place of healing. It looked exactly like a high-end prison. They wheeled me down a long, blindingly white corridor. The sharp smell of strong antiseptic and old despair filled my burning lungs. I was pushed roughly into a small, sterile room with a single barred window. A tall nurse with a face like carved stone approached my bed. She held a thick syringe filled with a cloudy liquid. "Time to sleep, Mrs. Sterling," she said in a flat, monotone voice. I did not resist. Fighting the needle would only get me restrained tighter. I felt the sharp pinch in my upper arm. The cold chemical rushed quickly into my veins. Almost instantly, a heavy, suffocating fog began to roll heavily over my brain. My vision blurred. My limbs turned to heavy lead. As the unnatural darkness dragged me under, my heavy eyes caught a fleeting glimpse through the small glass panel of the heavy door. Julian was standing in the dim hallway. He was sliding a thick white envelope full of cash into the pocket of the head orderly. Even through the heavy fog of the powerful sedative, I heard my son's final command clearly. Keep her heavily medicated. And make sure she never touches a telephone. The bright light in the room went out, and my silent war in the shadows began. The blinding fluorescent light on the ceiling hummed with a maddening buzz. I forced my heavy eyelids open. My mouth tasted like dry ash. a foul, metallic bitterness coating my tongue. The heavy sedative they pumped into my veins the night before still lingered, wrapping my brain in a suffocating, thick fog. I tried to curl my fingers into a fist. They felt like blocks of solid lead. I had to fight it. I could not let their chemical poison steal my mind. A heavy metal door groaned open. A nurse walked into the sterile white room. She was young, with cold, indifferent eyes, holding a tiny plastic cup containing 2 large white pills. "Time for your morning medication, Evelyn," she said in a flat, robotic tone. I knew exactly what would happen if I refused. They would strap me down and use the needle again. So, I played along. I let my jaw hang slightly loose. I stared at the blank wall with empty prices, unfocused eyes, mimicking the hollow gaze of the truly broken souls in this place. She placed the bitter pills directly onto my tongue and handed me a small paper cup of water. I took a slow sip. I swallowed the water. But I pushed the thick pills deep into the pocket of my cheek. The nurse checked my mouth with a quick, careless glance, satisfied with my apparent submission, and walked out. The moment the heavy door clicked shut, I spat the dissolving pills into my trembling hand. I crushed them into fine white powder and rubbed them deep into the mattress seam. I needed my head entirely clear for the war that was coming. Hours later, the sharp, rhythmic click of expensive Italian leather shoes echoed down the quiet corridor. The sound stopped right outside my door. The locks turned. Julian stepped into my small, miserable cell. He looked entirely out of place in this sterile nightmare. My eldest son wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, a silk tie, and a gold watch that gleamed under the harsh lights. The very watch I bought him when he graduated from business school. He carried a slim leather briefcase. He stood over my narrow bed, smiling down at me with absolute, chilling arrogance. "Good morning, Mother," he said smoothly. "You look terrible. But Dr. Vance assures me you are adjusting very well to the intensive treatment." He popped open the golden clasps of his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. I recognized the heavy watermarked paper immediately. It was a comprehensive power of attorney form. "Just sign this, Mother," Julian instructed, holding out a silver pen. "It grants me full executive control of the family trust fund and the real estate portfolios while you rest and recover. It is the easiest way. Do not fight me on this. We both know you are too sick to manage the empire." Rage. And pure, unadulterated rage flared hot in my chest. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical wound. This was the boy I raised. The boy whose massive gambling debts I secretly paid off so his father would not disown him. Now, he was standing over my captive body, demanding the keys to my entire life's work. I sat up. My voice was shaking, but my words were sharp like broken glass. "You are a pathetic thief, Julian. You and your coward of a father will never touch a single dime of my money. I will see you rot in a federal cell before I sign that paper." Julian sighed heavily. He did not look angry. He looked entirely bored. He stepped back and pressed a bright red button on the wall. Less than 10 seconds later, 2 massive, muscular orderlies rushed into the room. "My mother is having another violent psychotic episode," Julian told them calmly, stepping out of their way. "She is hallucinating again. She might hurt herself." "No," I screamed, scrambling backward against the cold wall. "Do not touch me. I am completely sane." They grabbed my arms with brutal force. I struggled. I kicked, but they were far too strong. They slammed me back down onto the mattress, pinning my wrists and ankles. A nurse rushed in, holding a prepared syringe. I felt the sharp, freezing pinch of the needle pierce my thigh. "Sleep it off." "Mother," Julian whispered close to my ear as the unnatural darkness began to drag me under. "We have all the time in the world. You have absolutely none." When I finally woke up the second time, my entire body ached with a dull, throbbing pain. The new chemical dose was much stronger, but as the fog slowly cleared, a terrifying realization settled over me. Fighting them with words, logic, or anger was completely useless. This facility was not a hospital for healing. Oak Ridge Private Sanitarium was a highly expensive black site. A luxury prison where wealthy families paid massive fortunes to quietly dispose of their inconvenient relatives. The doctors were paid extremely well to keep me diagnosed. The nurses were paid to keep me compliant. Every single time I raised my voice to demand my rights, they would simply label it an aggressive episode and inject me with more poison until my brain actually melted into useless mush. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to exact my vengeance and reclaim my stolen dignity, Evelyn, the fierce financial architect, had to completely disappear. I had to become exactly what they desperately wanted me to be: a broken, confused, and terrified old woman. The very next morning, when the corrupt Dr. Vance came for his daily evaluation, I did not argue. I did not demand a lawyer. I sat huddled in the dark corner of the room, rocking back and forth slowly. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the floor. I let my hands tremble uncontrollably. "How are we feeling today, Mrs. Sterling?" the doctor asked, scribbling on his clipboard. "I am so tired," I mumbled, forcing my voice to crack perfectly. I let a single, pathetic tear roll down my cheek. "Please. My head hurts so much. I just want to be quiet." The doctor observed my shattered posture. He looked extremely pleased with his own work. "The aggressive, paranoid tendencies are significantly subsiding. Reduce her sedative dosage by half. Keep her on the oral medication only. Let us see how she behaves." It worked perfectly. They genuinely thought they had finally broken my spirit. They were lowering their guard. The reduced dosage meant my sharp mind was finally mine again. For the next 3 days, I played the flawless role of a ghost. I shuffled slowly around the small room. I took their bitter pills, hiding them under my tongue, and spat them into the toilet the moment I was left alone. It was the deep middle of the 4th night. The psychiatric ward was deathly quiet. I lay awake in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, carefully calculating my impossible next move. I needed an ally on the inside. I needed a crack in their perfect armor. Through the small, reinforced glass window in my door, I had a narrow view of the dimly lit hallway. I heard a very soft, suppressed sniffing sound. Someone was crying. I crept silently out of my bed and pressed my face against the cold glass. It was the young night nurse. Her name tag read Clara. She was sitting alone at the small observation desk just outside my room. She was holding a crumpled, brightly colored piece of paper, frantically wiping hot tears from her exhausted eyes. I squinted in the dim light, focusing hard. My decades of reading complex financial documents from across massive boardroom tables kicked in instantly. The bold red header on her paper was unmistakable. It was a final foreclosure notice from a major national bank. Clara was severely in debt, and she was about to lose her home. She looked completely desperate, and in my world, Desperate people make terrible mistakes, or they make highly profitable deals. A cold, sharp smile touched my lips for the first time in many dark days. Julian thought he had completely locked me away from the world. He foolishly forgot that I built my entire empire by finding people's hidden weaknesses and turning them into absolute leverage. Clara was my key to the outside world, and I was going to buy her loyalty. Clara, I whispered. My voice was raspy from the heavy medication, but it carried clearly through the small, reinforced window of my heavy door. The young nurse jumped. She quickly hid the bright pink foreclosure notice behind her back and wiped her exhausted eyes. She walked cautiously to my door, sliding open the small metal speaking panel. "Mrs. Sterling," Clara said nervously, looking over her shoulder. "You should be fast asleep. Do you need a glass of water? I need you to listen to me," I replied, pressing my face close to the cold metal grate. "That letter you are holding, it is a final notice of default from the First National Bank. I can see the bold red header. You are 90 days behind on your mortgage, and they are threatening to take your home in exactly 2 weeks." Clara gasped. Her face went entirely pale. How could you possibly know that? You are crazy," I finished the sentence for her. A dark, hollow laugh escaped my dry lips. "I am not crazy, Clara. I am extremely wealthy, and I am a political prisoner in my own life. But more importantly, I know exactly how to stop that foreclosure. I know a massive loophole in the federal banking regulations regarding predatory lending rates." Clara looked around the empty, brightly lit hallway. Her hands were shaking violently. "If I talk to you, Dr. Vance will fire me immediately. He told the entire staff that you are highly manipulative and dangerous." "Dr. Vance is a highly paid warden," I stated coldly. "He does not care if you sleep on the freezing street next month." "I do. If you write down the exact loan details on a napkin and slide it under this door, I will give you the exact legal phrasing to freeze the foreclosure process for at least 6 months. All I ask in return is 5 minutes with your cell phone." The young nurse stared at me. She was terrified, but the crushing weight of her massive debt was far heavier than her fear of the corrupt doctor. The desperation in her eyes was a language I fluently understood. Without a single word, Clara stepped back. She disappeared for a brief moment and returned with a cheap plastic pen and a crumpled paper napkin. She quickly scribbled the details of her loan and slid it under the heavy metal door. I picked it up, reading the numbers in the dim moonlight filtering through my barred window. The bank had illegally compounded the penalty interest. It was a classic, dirty trap for lower-income workers. I spent the next hour carefully dictating a formal legal response through the small grate. I told Clara exactly which federal statute to quote, which banking ombudsman to copy on the email, and exactly how to threaten them with a massive class action audit. Clara wrote down every single word with a trembling hand. "Send that tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. I instructed softly. "The bank's legal department will flag it immediately. They will freeze your account foreclosure pending a full legal review. You will keep your home." Clara, a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, she reached into her uniform pocket. She pulled out a small, cheap smartphone. She looked at the hallway camera, ensuring we were completely in the blind spot, and slid the phone under my door. 5 minutes. Clara mouthed silently. My heart hammered heavily against my ribs as my cold fingers closed around the warm plastic device. This tiny machine was my only weapon. I retreated to the darkest corner of my cell, hiding completely under the thin hospital blanket to conceal the glowing screen. I did not call the police. The local police would simply call Arthur, and Dr. Vance would gladly hand them my fake psychiatric evaluation. I needed cold, hard information. I opened the web browser and logged into my highly encrypted offshore server, a hidden financial network I had built decades ago, completely separate from the family trust. I initiated a deep background trace on my husband and my eldest son. The glowing screen illuminated the brutal truth of my massive betrayal. Arthur had not even waited a full week to replace me. Bank records showed a massive purchase of luxury furniture and expensive designer clothing delivered to our primary mansion. A quick search on social media revealed the disgusting reality. Arthur had moved a 25-year-old fitness instructor into my home. She was posting pictures wearing my vintage diamond necklace, posing arrogantly by my private pool, calling herself the new lady of the house. 30 years of marriage, completely erased and discarded for a young, shallow girl. But the pain of Arthur's pathetic infidelity was absolutely nothing compared to the sickening discovery I made about my son. I accessed Julian's hidden financial footprint. My eldest son, the supposed absolute genius of the board of directors, was in complete ruin. He had bypassed the corporate accounting department and taken a massive personal loan, $5 million. I traced the original lender. It was a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, operating under the fake name Apex Vanguard Group. But I recognized the complex routing numbers instantly. Apex Vanguard was a known money laundering front for a ruthless organized crime syndicate operating out of the eastern seaboard. Julian had borrowed $5 million from the mob to cover a disastrous string of illegal stock shorts. And the mob does not send polite collection letters. They send violent assassins. The pieces of the ugly puzzle violently locked into place. This was never about my mental health. This was not even about Arthur's new young mistress. This entire elaborate coup was an act of pure, desperate survival. Julian desperately needed to steal the family trust fund to pay off the criminal syndicate before they broke his legs and threw him into the freezing river. And Arthur went along with it because the trust fund was the exact only thing keeping his lavish, fake lifestyle afloat. They threw me into a mental asylum because murdering me would have triggered a massive federal investigation and frozen all the accounts for years. They needed me alive, but legally incompetent. They needed my signature on that power of attorney document. The last shred of maternal warmth inside my chest completely died. I was no longer a heartbroken mother weeping for her lost family. I was Evelyn Sterling, the unseen architect, the apex predator. And they had just made the most fatal miscalculation of their pathetic lives. They thought they were burying a fragile old woman. They did not realize they had just buried a ticking time bomb. I quickly cleared the browser history, locked the encrypted portal, and slid the phone back under the door to Clara. "Thank you," I whispered into the dark. The very next morning, the heavy metal door swung open with a violent crash. Dr. Vance marched into my cell, accompanied by two massive orderlies holding thick leather restraints. He looked incredibly angry. "Mrs. Sterling," Dr. Vance said, his voice dripping with false concern and very real malice. "Your son, Julian, just called me. He is very disappointed in your complete lack of cooperation. He strongly feels that your delusions are getting significantly worse." I sat perfectly still on the edge of the narrow bed. I kept my head down, playing the broken victim. "I just want to go home." "You are not going anywhere," Dr. Vance snapped. He pulled a medical chart from his clipboard. "Julian has officially authorized a severe escalation in your treatment protocol. If you do not sign the power of attorney documents when he visits tomorrow afternoon, I have been clearly instructed to transfer you to the basement ward. A cold, terrifying chill ran down my spine. The basement ward. We will begin a highly aggressive regimen of electroconvulsive therapy. Dr. Vance continued smoothly. Electroshock therapy is very effective for stubborn, violent patients. Of course, it tends to erase large portions of your memory. Permanently. It is your choice. Evelyn, sign the papers, or completely lose your mind forever. He turned on his heel and walked out, the heavy metal door slamming shut behind him. They were going to literally fry my brain. The clock was rapidly ticking down to absolute zero. Julian confidently thought he was forcing me into an impossible corner. But he did not know about the hidden trapdoor I had meticulously built into the trust fund 5 long years ago. Let him bring the papers tomorrow. I was finally ready to sign his absolute death warrant. The harsh afternoon sun filtered weakly through the thick iron bars of my window, casting long, prison-like shadows across the sterile white floor. The heavy metal locks on my door clicked loudly. 3 men walked into my tiny, suffocating cell. Julian was in the lead, wearing a sharp charcoal suit that practically screamed arrogance. Right behind him stood Richard Caldwell, the senior corporate attorney for my family trust. The third man was a silent, muscular hospital orderly carrying a heavy black tripod and a high-definition video camera. I sat curled up in the darkest corner of my narrow bed. I pulled the thin, scratchy hospital blanket tightly up to my chin. I forced my hands to shake. I let my eyes dart nervously around the room, perfectly mimicking the erratic paranoia of a heavily medicated patient. Set the camera up right there, Julian commanded the orderly, pointing to the foot of my bed. Make sure you get a very clear shot of her face and the documents. The orderly nodded silently and positioned the lens. A tiny red light blinked on. They were recording me. They wanted absolute, undeniable video proof that I was willingly handing over my massive empire. Caldwell clutched a thick leather binder to his chest. He looked around the depressing psychiatric cell with obvious discomfort. He was a man used to massive mahogany boardrooms and expensive golf courses, not the bleak reality of a luxury asylum. Julian, Caldwell whispered nervously. Are you absolutely sure she is lucid enough to execute a legal transfer of this magnitude? She looks terrible. Dr. Vance assures me this is merely a temporary dip in her mood. Julian lied smoothly, not even blinking. The medication makes her a bit sluggish, but she completely understands what is happening. Right. Mother Julian took a slow step toward me. He reached into his tailored jacket and pulled out a silver fountain pen. He held it out like a poisoned peace offering. Mother, we are here to help you, Julian said softly. His voice was dripping with fake sympathy for the rolling camera. You have been under so much terrible stress. The trust fund is simply too much for you to handle right now. I just want you to rest. Just sign the power of attorney, and I will take care of absolutely everything. I shrank back against the freezing concrete wall. I let out a pathetic, trembling whimper. I looked directly at the glowing red eye of the video camera. If Julian wanted a theatrical performance to present to a judge later, I was going to give him a masterpiece. Julian, please, I cried out, my voice cracking perfectly. Do not let them take me to the basement, Dr. Vance said. He would take me to the basement and burn my brain with the electricity, please. Do not let him fry my mind. Caldwell went entirely pale. He took a sudden step backward. Julian, what on earth is she talking about electroshock therapy? You never mentioned anything about... She is hallucinating again. Richard Julian snapped sharply, losing his composed mask for a fraction of a second. He quickly forced a calm smile back onto his face. It is just the paranoid dementia talking. Nobody is taking you to the basement. Mother, you are perfectly safe here. But you must sign the papers so I can pay for your continued care. He stepped closer. Looming over me like a dark shadow, he leaned in, blocking the camera's view of his face, and lowered his voice to a vicious, threatening whisper, "Sign the damn paper. Or I swear to God, I will authorize the shock therapy tomorrow morning." I let out a loud, dramatic sob. I reached out with trembling, fragile fingers and took the silver pen from his hand. Caldwell quickly placed the thick stack of watermarked legal documents onto my lap. He flipped to the final page. There were 3 distinct signature lines. One for me, one for Julian, and one for the notary public. Mrs. Sterling, Caldwell said formally, speaking loudly for the camera. Do you understand that by signing this document, you are transferring total executive control of the Sterling Family Trust to your son? Julian Sterling, I just want to sleep, I mumbled weakly, letting heavy tears spill down my pale cheeks. Give it all to him. Give him everything. Just let me sleep in peace. I pressed the golden tip of the pen against the thick paper. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. Julian thought he was cornering a helpless prey. He had absolutely no idea that he was stepping blindly onto a massive landmine. 5 years ago, I sat in a highly secure, heavily guarded federal building in Washington. I had a completely private meeting with a senior director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. When you control a multi-billion-dollar financial empire, you must anticipate every single nightmare scenario: kidnapping, extortion, hostage situations. I worked with the federal agents to establish a highly classified distress protocol, a dead man's switch. We registered a very specific, slightly altered variant of my legal signature. If I ever used that specific signature on a major financial transfer, the bank's automated systems would silently flag the document. It would immediately trigger a massive, covert federal freeze and a criminal audit. I slowly signed my name on the first line, but I did not use my standard, elegant, flowing cursive. I deliberately broke the upper loop on the letter E. I dragged the bottom curve of the letter S down into a sharp, jagged, unnatural hook. I made the entire signature look exactly like the clumsy, erratic handwriting of a heavily medicated, deeply terrified old woman. I signed the second page, then the third. Every single signature carried the exact same broken, jagged letters. To Julian and his greedy lawyer, it looked like a total, humiliating surrender. To the federal banking authorities, it was a blaring red siren screaming for immediate intervention. I let the silver pen slip from my weak fingers. It clattered loudly against the floor. I pulled the blanket over my head and began to rock back and forth, sobbing loudly. Julian snatched the legal documents from my lap. He stared down at the 3 broken signatures. His eyes widened. A sickening, triumphant smile spread across his handsome face. He was looking at the absolute master key to an empire worth billions. He thought he had just won the war. Thank you, Mother, Julian whispered softly. You did the right thing. Have a good sleep. He turned on his heel and walked briskly toward the door. Caldwell followed closely behind, looking deeply relieved to finally escape the depressing room. The orderly quickly packed up the black tripod and the video camera. The heavy metal door slammed shut. The deadbolt slid into place with a loud echo, echo. I listened closely as their rapid footsteps faded away down the long, dedicar, silent corridor. I waited until the entire ward was completely quiet. Then, I slowly lowered the thin hospital blanket. My violent trembling stopped instantly. My tears dried up in the cold, sterile air. My hunched shoulders straightened out. The pathetic, broken, terrified mother completely vanished into the shadows. The cold, calculating financial architect returned to the surface. I looked at the locked metal door. A dark, dangerous smile slowly forming on my dry lips, but Julian thought he was walking out of this asylum as a wealthy king. He did not realize he was walking out with a ticking federal bomb strapped directly to his chest. He was going to take those documents straight to the First National Bank. The moment the bank tellers scanned my jagged, broken signatures into the main server, the silent alarms would trigger. The trap was completely armed. The steel jaws were open. Now, all I had to do was sit quietly in the dark and wait for my foolish son to step directly into the blast radius. The waiting was the hardest part of the dark war. For 2 long days, I sat in my sterile white cell and played the perfect broken victim. Dr. Vance came in every single morning. He checked my dilated pupils. He noted my sluggish movements. He felt completely victorious. He reduced my heavy sedative slightly, thinking the psychological damage was already permanent. He was a medical fool. My mind was sharper than a finely polished diamond. On the 3rd night, Clara slipped into my room. The young night nurse was trembling violently. She locked the heavy metal door behind her and pulled a folded stack of papers from inside her uniform. She had gone to a public library across the city. She used the highly encrypted web address I gave her to print my banking alerts. I hid under the thin hospital blanket with a small penlight. I scanned the transaction logs. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs. Julian had taken the bait completely. The jagged signatures I provided had worked flawlessly. The First National Bank processed the power of attorney documents. But the hidden federal algorithm attached to my broken signature immediately flagged the massive account. Julian now had executive control. But he was operating inside a massive, invisible federal cage. Every single penny he touched was being tracked by the highest levels of the government. I traced his first major move. It was exactly what I expected. Julian authorized a massive international wire transfer, $5 million. He moved the heavy funds directly from the primary sterling investment portfolio into the Cayman Islands account of Apex Vanguard. My pathetic son thought he was finally paying off his massive gambling debt to the ruthless mob. He thought he was buying his life back. He was incredibly wrong. By moving that money under a flagged federal audit, Julian had just committed first-degree wire fraud. He had officially laundered millions for a known organized crime syndicate. The federal government would not just charge him with simple corporate theft. They would charge him under the severe federal racketeering laws. He had practically begged for 20 years in a maximum security prison. "Look at this," Clara whispered softly, holding out her glowing phone. "Your husband is on the internet." I looked at the small, bright screen. My blood turned to absolute ice. Arthur was broadcasting his stolen wealth to the entire world. There was a bright picture of him standing on the wooden deck of a massive new luxury yacht. Standing right next to him was the young fitness instructor of 25 years. She was wearing a blinding diamond necklace. The exact diamond necklace my grandmother gave me. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with my beautiful queen." He bought a luxury yacht with my blood money. He bought diamonds with my life savings. He gave away my sacred family heirlooms. He did all of this while his wife of 30 years was locked in a psychiatric prison, eating cold oatmeal and dodging the threat of electroshock therapy. Their arrogance was absolutely breathtaking. They truly believed I was effectively dead and buried. "Give me the phone." "Clara," I commanded softly. "It is time to close the jaws of the trap." Clara handed me the device. She stood watch by the small glass window, watching the empty hallway. I dialed a highly secure sequence of numbers. It was a direct line to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network in Washington. It rang exactly twice. Director Thorne speaking. A deep, gravelly voice answered. "Marcus," I said quietly. "It is Evelyn Sterling." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, good God, we received the silent distress signal from your trust accounts 3 days ago. We traced the massive offshore transfers today. But we could not locate you anywhere. Your husband filed legal documents claiming you were heavily sedated at a private wellness retreat. I am locked in a corrupt psychiatric asylum." I replied coldly. "My son forced me to sign away the empire under the threat of aggressive electroshock therapy. He is paying off a massive mob debt. I am sending a heavily armed federal strike team to your location right now," Marcus stated firmly. "We will tear those doors off the hinges. We will arrest Dr. Vance and your family before morning." "No," I hissed sharply, gripping the phone tight. "Do not come here yet, Evelyn. You are in extreme danger. I have survived this long." "Marcus." I interrupted him, my voice completely steady. "If you arrest them quietly in the middle of the night, they will hire expensive lawyers. They will spin a pathetic story about a tragic family misunderstanding. I do not want them to merely fail. I want them absolutely destroyed." I paused, letting the cold silence hang between us. "Are the wire fraud charges completely locked?" I asked. "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "We have the entire digital footprint. Julian wired $5 million to a known criminal syndicate. Arthur signed off on corporate embezzlements to buy a yacht. We have them both dead to rights." "Then wait," I instructed smoothly. "Do exactly as I say." Clara tapped my shoulder nervously. She pointed to a new notification on the hospital staff message board. It was a formal memo from the hospital administration. "Mrs. Sterling," Clara whispered in shock. "Look at this memo. Dr. Vance is invited to a massive corporate gala this weekend. Your son is hosting a huge event at the Ritz-Carlton." I read the bright screen. Julian and Arthur were throwing a massive celebration this coming Saturday night. They invited all the major shareholders, the city politicians, and the elite wealthy socialites. Julian was planning to formally announce my permanent medical retirement. He was going to officially crown himself the new absolute chairman of the Sterling Empire. A dark, terrifying smile spread across my face in the shadows. "Marcus," I spoke into the phone, "do you see the massive corporate gala scheduled for this Saturday at the Ritz-Carlton? I see it." Marcus replied slowly. "Julian Sterling is the host. That is your absolute target." I declared, "Do not arrest them in the dark. Bring your federal agents to the gala. I want the heavy handcuffs slapped on their wrists in front of every single person they are trying to impress. I want their pathetic empire to burn on a massive public stage." Marcus let out a low, impressed chuckle. "You are absolutely ruthless. Evelyn, we will prepare the federal arrest warrants. But how will you get out of the asylum?" I looked up at Clara. The young nurse gave me a firm, determined nod. She was no longer just a terrified employee drowning in debt. She was my devoted ally. "Do not worry about me," I said softly. "I will arrive exactly on time. Just have your agents ready at the doors." I ended the call and handed the phone back to Clara. The heavy trap was completely set. Julian and Arthur were happily walking toward a grand stage, completely unaware that it was built directly over a deep pit of fire. They wanted to steal my crown. They wanted to erase my dignity. They were going to get exactly what they deserved. The massive corporate gala was set for Saturday night. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton had been completely rented out for the evening. Julian and Arthur were sparing absolutely no expense to celebrate their magnificent coup. It was exactly what I wanted. But before the grand stage could be completely set, I needed to ensure my own quiet exit from this medical prison. And for that, my careless husband and my arrogant son unwittingly provided the absolute perfect opportunity. It was Friday afternoon. Dr. Vance practically strutted into my sterile room, adjusting a very expensive new silk tie. He was humming a light, cheerful tune. The corrupt doctor had a massive, self-satisfied smile plastered across his face. "Evelyn," Dr. Vance said, tapping his thick medical clipboard. "Your husband Arthur just called. He and Julian are hosting a very important corporate event this weekend. They are incredibly busy. They explicitly requested that you remain completely heavily sedated for the next 48 hours to ensure absolutely no disruptions to your delicate recovery." He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. He was not a doctor. He was a highly paid butcher. "I have already instructed the evening nursing staff to double your regular sedative dosage." Vance continued smoothly. "You will sleep right through the entire weekend. By Monday morning, your son will officially be the undisputed chairman of the Sterling Corporation, and your permanent transfer to the basement ward will be fully processed." I huddled on the edge of the narrow bed, trembling violently. I wrapped my thin arms around my knees, pretending to be absolutely terrified of his cruel threat. "Please." "No," I whispered weakly, my voice cracking perfectly. Dr. Vance just chuckled softly, turning on his heel and walking out of the room. The heavy metal door slammed shut, the deadbolt sliding into place with a loud, final click. They were so dangerously overconfident. Arthur and Julian were so focused on the bright, glittering lights of their massive upcoming gala that they forgot the most basic rule of a hostile takeover. Never completely turn your back on the architect. At exactly 10 o'clock that night, the sharp click of the heavy door lock echoed through the silent corridor. Clara slipped into the dark room. She was holding a small medical tray. Sitting in the center of the silver tray was a thick, terrifying syringe filled with a cloudy, heavy liquid. It was the double dose of the severe chemical sedative that Dr. Vance had legally ordered. But Clara was not crying anymore. Her hands were completely steady. She walked quickly over to my bed. Without a single word of hesitation, she took the thick syringe and sprayed the expensive, mind-numbing chemical directly into the small metal sink. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a second, identical syringe. This one was simply filled with harmless saline solution and basic B vitamins. "Dr. Vance is watching the security cameras from his main office," Clara whispered quickly, pressing the dull needle against my arm. "You have to make it look incredibly real." I nodded silently. I let my eyes roll back slightly. I allowed my entire body to go completely limp against the scratchy mattress. I let my jaw fall open, perfectly mimicking the immediate, devastating effects of a massive chemical overdose. Clara carefully placed a small bandage over the fake injection site and quickly left the room. I lay perfectly still for 3 long hours, waiting patiently for the heavy hospital to fall completely asleep. At exactly 1 in the morning, my secure cell door opened again. But this time, it was not just Clara. Standing in the dim hallway was a tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a sharp, dark suit. He had a stern, uncompromising face and carried a thick leather briefcase. It was Marcus Thorne, the senior director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. My oldest and most trusted ally in Washington. I slowly sat up, dropping the heavy act completely. My eyes were sharp. My posture was straight. I was Evelyn Sterling again. Marcus, I said quietly, stepping out of the narrow bed. Evelyn. Marcus replied, his deep voice thick with absolute disgust as he looked around the miserable, sterile cell. I cannot believe they actually put you in this hellhole. My heavily armed strike team is waiting silently in the transport vans right outside the backloading dock. We can raid this corrupt facility right now. No. I stopped him immediately, holding up my hand. I told you, if you raid this hospital tonight, Julian and Arthur will instantly know I am completely free. They will immediately call their expensive defense lawyers. They will transfer the stolen funds deeper into the dark web. I want them absolutely blind and defenseless when the heavy hammer finally drops. I turned to Clara, who was watching us with wide, nervous eyes. Clara, I said softly, did you bring what I asked for? The young nurse nodded quickly. She reached into the large linen cart parked in the hallway and pulled out a sleek, black garment bag. She handed it to me. Your private tailor at the Sterling estate works very late hours, Clara whispered with a small, nervous smile. Just, and she absolutely hates your husband. I unzipped the heavy black bag. Inside was my signature power armor. A perfectly tailored, razor-sharp midnight blue executive suit, crisp white silk blouse, expensive Italian leather heels, and a single, bold tube of deep red lipstick. Give me exactly 10 minutes, I told Marcus, taking the bag into the small bathroom. When I stepped back out into the dim light of the psychiatric cell, the broken, terrified old woman was completely gone. The fierce, untouchable financial titan had fully returned. I felt the familiar, heavy weight of absolute authority settle perfectly onto my shoulders. Marcus looked at me and smiled a cold, dangerous smile. Welcome back, Evelyn. We are not leaving quite yet, I stated firmly, adjusting my sharp cuffs. Dr. Vance is still sitting comfortably in his plush executive office, and he has my completely fabricated medical records. My agents can easily break his door down. Marcus offered instantly. We do not need to break the door, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any warmth. I am going to walk right in. I want to see the exact look on his arrogant face when he realizes he just sold his entire medical career for a fistful of dirty mob money. We walked silently down the long, empty hospital corridor. Clara used her master keycard to bypass the heavy security doors. We moved like ghosts through the very facility that was designed to completely erase me. We reached the heavy oak doors of the main administrative office. Light spilled out from underneath. Dr. Vance was still awake, probably counting the massive bribe Julian had just wired to his offshore account. I did not knock. I simply turned the heavy brass handle and pushed the door wide open. Dr. Vance looked up from his massive mahogany desk, a glass of expensive brandy frozen halfway to his lips. His smug, self-satisfied smile instantly vanished. His face went entirely pale, draining of absolutely all color. He stared at me, completely paralyzed by sheer, undeniable terror. He was looking at the woman he had personally ordered to be heavily sedated, standing tall and furious in a sharp executive suit, accompanied by a senior federal agent. "Good evening, Dr. Vance," I said smoothly, my voice echoing like cold steel in the quiet room. "I believe it is finally time for my complete medical discharge." The true architect was finally out of her cage, and the massive corporate gala was only 24 hours away. The heavy oak door of the hospital administrator's office remained wide open. Dr. Vance sat entirely frozen in his expensive leather chair, staring at the perfectly tailored midnight blue executive suit I wore. He looked at the confident, icy expression on my face, and then his terrified eyes slowly shifted to Marcus Thorne, the imposing federal agent standing right beside me. The silence in the room was absolute. I let him stew in his own escalating panic for a few long, agonizing moments. I wanted him to fully realize the massive magnitude of his fatal mistake. "Mrs. Sterling," Dr. Vance finally stammered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. "IPCS. I do not understand. You were supposed to be heavily sedated in your room. I specifically ordered. You ordered a chemical lobotomy for a perfectly sane woman in exchange for a massive, illegal offshore wire transfer." I cut him off, my voice cold and sharp, like a freshly sharpened blade. "You accepted a highly illegal bribe from my son, Julian Sterling, to falsely declare me mentally incompetent and hold me against my will. In the federal legal system, that is technically classified as kidnapping and severe medical malpractice." Vance swallowed hard. His face was slick with cold sweat. He frantically tried to maintain his arrogant facade. "You are clearly having another paranoid delusion. Evelyn, I will call the orderlies right now and have you restrained." He reached a shaking hand toward the red emergency phone on his massive desk. Before his fingers could even graze the plastic receiver, Marcus stepped forward. He did not yell. He did not draw a weapon. He simply reached into his dark suit jacket and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of official federal documents, dropping them loudly onto the center of the mahogany desk. "My name is Marcus Thorne, Senior Director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network," Marcus stated, his deep voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. "We have the exact digital trace of the $2 million Julian Sterling wired to your secret account in the Cayman Islands. We have the complete, unedited internal camera footage proving you ordered a dangerous double dose of sedatives for a patient who showed absolutely no medical need for them. If your hand touches that phone, you will not just lose your medical license. You will spend the next 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary." Dr. Vance's hand slowly dropped to his lap. The last shred of his pathetic arrogance completely vanished, replaced by the crushing reality of absolute ruin. He looked like a deflated balloon. What do you want from me?" he whispered. Completely defeated, I walked slowly around the edge of his desk. I leaned down, resting my hands firmly on the polished wood, bringing my face very close to his. "I want the absolute truth," I demanded softly. "I want you to officially sign a sworn federal affidavit stating that Julian Sterling and Arthur Sterling explicitly forced you to fabricate my psychiatric evaluation. I want you to admit they paid you to keep me heavily sedated so they could illegally steal the Sterling Family Trust Fund. You will become a cooperating federal witness tonight, Dr. Vance, or you will leave this building in heavy steel handcuffs." He did not even hesitate. The coward immediately reached for his expensive gold pen. "I will sign whatever you want. Just please, do not send me to federal prison. As Marcus began walking the terrified doctor through the complex legal paperwork, I turned and walked back out into the quiet hospital corridor. Clara was waiting there, nervously wringing her hands together. I reached into my tailored jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. I handed it to the young nurse. Clara looked at the envelope, confused. "What is this?" "Mrs. Sterling, it is a highly certified cashier's check," I explained, my voice finally softening just a fraction. "It is more than enough to completely pay off your terrible mortgage and cover the remaining balance of your nursing school loans. You saved my life in this dark prison." "Clara, I always pay my massive debts." Tears welled up in her eyes. She tried to hand it back. "I cannot take this. It is too much money. I just wanted to help you." "Take it," I insisted, closing her trembling hands over the thick envelope. "And leave this terrible facility tonight. Do not ever come back. By tomorrow morning, this corrupt hospital will be completely shut down by the federal government." 10 minutes later, I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the Oak Ridge Private Sanitarium. I did not look back. The freezing night air hit my face, crisp and incredibly liberating. For the first time in an agonizing week, I took a deep, unfiltered breath of pure freedom. A massive, armored black SUV was waiting silently in the shadows of the hospital parking lot. The engine hummed with a low, even, powerful growl. 2 federal agents stood quietly by the doors, wearing dark tactical gear. Marcus walked out behind me, holding the freshly signed and legally notarized affidavit from Dr. Vance. He opened the heavy back door of the SUV for me. "The trap is completely set, Evelyn," Marcus said as I climbed into the leather seat. "The wire fraud charges are locked. The extortion and kidnapping charges are now fully supported by a sworn medical witness. We have everything we need to completely destroy them." "Good," I replied, staring straight ahead into the dark city night. "My strike team is in position at the Ritz-Carlton," Marcus continued, climbing into the front passenger seat. "The massive corporate gala has been going on for 2 hours. Julian is scheduled to give his grand keynote speech in exactly 20 minutes. I looked at the digital clock glowing on the dashboard. It was time. Julian and Arthur thought they had completely won. They thought they had successfully erased me from the world. They were currently standing in a grand ballroom, drinking expensive champagne, surrounded by the wealthy elite, celebrating the absolute theft of my entire life's work. They wanted a magnificent public spectacle. I was going to give them a legendary execution. "Tell your men to stand by at all the main exits," I ordered coldly. "Nobody leaves that ballroom until I am completely finished." The heavy black SUV pulled out of the parking lot, speeding toward the glowing heart of the city. The architect was finally returning to her stolen empire, and she was bringing the full, devastating weight of absolute justice with her. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was a blinding sea of crystal chandeliers, expensive champagne, and arrogant wealth. I stood quietly in the dark shadows of the heavy velvet curtains near the secondary service entrance. Marcus Thorne stood right beside me. Behind us, 20 heavily armed federal agents waited in absolute silence, completely blocking every possible exit. Through the narrow gap in the curtains, I watched my foolish family celebrate their massive theft. The stage was magnificent. Massive floral arrangements flanked a pure white marble podium. Arthur stood proudly at the microphone, wearing a bespoke tuxedo. He held up a delicate crystal flute of vintage champagne. Standing directly beside him was his young fitness instructor mistress, sparkling like a cheap imitation of a queen. She was wearing my grandmother's priceless diamond necklace, "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur announced, his voice booming through the expensive sound system. "Tonight is not just a celebration of massive corporate success. It is a deeply personal transition. As many of you unfortunately know, my dear wife Evelyn has suffered a tragic and severe mental collapse." A soft, sympathetic murmur rippled through the wealthy crowd. My stomach churned with pure disgust. He was using my fabricated insanity to farm public sympathy. She is resting comfortably in a highly secure private facility. Arthur continued, placing a dramatic hand over his cold heart. The crushing weight of the Sterling Empire simply broke her fragile mind. But the massive legacy she helped build must continue to thrive. Arthur turned and gestured grandly toward the center of the stage. And so, with a heavy heart but immense pride, I officially introduce the new, undisputed chairman of the Sterling Corporation, a young man of brilliant vision. My beloved son, Julian Sterling. The grand ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Julian practically strutted onto the stage. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored suit that cost more than a luxury car. He hugged his father tightly. A bright, arrogant smile plastered across his handsome face. He stepped up to the marble podium, gripping the edges like a victorious king, looking down at his loyal subjects. "Thank you, Father," Julian said smoothly, leaning into the microphone. "This is a tremendous honor. The Sterling Corporation is entering a massive new era of aggressive expansion. I promise to lead this incredible family legacy into day one." "You are not leading anything, Julian." My voice was not amplified by any microphone. It was not a scream. It was a cold, razor-sharp command that cut straight through the heavy applause like a perfectly thrown knife. The applause died instantly. The grand ballroom fell into a stunned, terrifying silence. Hundreds of wealthy elites turned their heads toward the back of the room. I stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains. I was not wearing a miserable hospital gown. I was not heavily sedated or trembling in fear. I was wearing my sharpest midnight blue executive suit. My posture was perfectly straight. My deep red lipstick formed a cold, unforgiving line. I walked slowly down the center aisle, my expensive leather heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with absolute, unadulterated terror. He gripped the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned completely white. "Mother," he choked out, his confident voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched squeak. Arthur physically stumbled backward, knocking over his crystal glass of champagne. It shattered loudly on the stage. The young mistress grabbed his arm, completely confused by the sudden panic radiating from her wealthy lover. What is the meaning of this?" Arthur finally yelled, trying desperately to salvage his public authority. "Security, grab that woman immediately. She is a highly unstable psychiatric patient. She escaped from the asylum." Two massive private security guards stepped forward, reaching for my arms. "Do not touch her," a deep voice roared from the back of the room. Marcus Thorne stepped out of the shadows. He raised his gold federal badge high in the air for the entire ballroom to clearly see. Right behind him, the heavy wooden doors of the grand ballroom swung violently open. 20 federal agents marched into the room, their dark tactical gear contrasting sharply with the glittering crystal and silk. They immediately secured every exit. The wealthy crowd gasped in collective horror. The elite socialites quickly backed away, pressing themselves against the walls, realizing this was not a family dispute. This was a massive federal raid. I walked calmly up the short steps and stepped directly onto the grand stage. Julian was paralyzed. He looked like a small, terrified child trapped in the headlights of a speeding train. I stopped right in front of him. I looked into his greedy, cowardly eyes. Did you really think I would not build a dead man's switch into the massive trust fund I created? I asked softly, so only he could hear. You thought you were stealing an empire, Julian. But you were actually just walking into a federal vault holding a lit match. Julian's mouth opened and closed silently, like a dying fish. Marcus Thorne walked onto the stage, holding a thick stack of official federal arrest warrants. He did not care about the expensive suits or the glittering diamonds. He spoke with the absolute authority of the United States government. Julian Sterling. Marcus announced loudly, his voice echoing through the silent ballroom. You are under arrest for first-degree federal wire fraud, money laundering, and the illegal financial support of a known organized crime syndicate. We have the complete digital footprint of your $5 million transfer to the Cayman Islands. Julian's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the stage, sobbing hysterically. No. No. I had to. They were going to kill me. Mother, you have to help me. I looked down at the pathetic boy I had raised and protected for 30 years. I felt absolutely nothing. The mother who loved him completely died in that freezing psychiatric cell. I am not your mother anymore, I said coldly. Marcus turned his hard gaze to Arthur. My husband was hyperventilating, completely backing away toward the heavy stage curtains. Arthur Sterling. Marcus continued. You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement, severe federal extortion, and the medical kidnapping of Evelyn Sterling. We have a fully sworn, notarized affidavit from Dr. Elias Vance. He confessed to accepting your massive illegal bribe to falsify psychiatric records. It was Julian's idea, Arthur screamed, throwing his own son completely under the bus without a single second of hesitation. I did not know about the mob debt. I just wanted the trust fund, Evelyn. Please. Tell them I am innocent. You bought a luxury yacht with my money while you locked me in a mental asylum. I replied smoothly, turning to the young, terrified mistress. I reached out and violently snatched my grandmother's diamond necklace right off her neck. The delicate gold clasp snapped with a sharp click. The girl shrieked and covered her bare chest. These diamonds belong to the real architect, I told her firmly. Now get off my stage before I have you arrested for receiving stolen property. She did not argue. She turned and ran off the stage in her expensive high heels, completely abandoning Arthur to his absolute ruin. 2 federal agents grabbed Julian, pulling his arms roughly behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut with a loud, vinyl metallic snap. 2 other agents grabbed Arthur, slamming him face first against the white marble podium to secure his wrists. The grand ballroom was entirely silent, save for the pathetic, echoing sobs of my husband and my son. The wealthy elite watched in absolute shock as the 2 men who tried to steal my crown were dragged away like common street criminals. I stepped up to the microphone. I looked out at the massive sea of corporate shareholders and city politicians. The Sterling Corporation is currently under a complete federal audit, I announced clearly, my voice projecting absolute, unshakable power. The trust fund is entirely frozen. Every single illegal transaction authorized by Arthur and Julian will be aggressively clawed back. The era of their pathetic, greedy mismanagement is officially over. I paused, letting the heavy reality of my words sink into the room. I am Evelyn Sterling, I declared, staring directly into the flashing cameras of the local press. I built this empire from absolutely nothing, and I am officially taking it back. The trap was completely sprung. The power reversal was absolute. They tried to throw me into a dark basement to completely erase my mind. Instead, I just burned their entire fake world straight to the ground on the grandest public stage they could possibly afford. 3 months later, the heavy steel doors of the federal penitentiary closed behind me with a loud, echoing thud. The visiting room was freezing cold, smelling heavily of cheap bleach and deep despair. I sat perfectly straight in the uncomfortable metal chair, wearing my signature midnight blue suit. Waiting patiently, the armed guards brought them in together, Arthur and Julian. They were completely unrecognizable. The bespoke Italian suits and arrogant, confident smiles were entirely gone. They wore oversized, faded orange prison jumpsuits. Arthur had aged 10 years in just 90 days. His gray hair was thinning, his hands shaking violently as he sat down across the thick plexiglass partition. Julian looked even worse. He had a dark purple bruise covering his left eye, and he kept looking around the room in absolute frantic terror. The criminal syndicate he owed $5 million to had a very long reach, even inside a maximum security federal prison. Evelyn. Arthur choked out, picking up the heavy black phone receiver. His voice was a pathetic, broken whisper. Please. You have to help us. The federal lawyers say we are facing 20 years. The judge is absolutely merciless. I picked up my receiver. I looked at the man who promised to love and protect me for 30 long years. The man who threw me into a terrifying mental asylum so he could buy diamonds for a young, shallow mistress. I am not here to help you. Arthur, I said coldly. Julian violently snatched the phone from his father. He pressed his bruised face against the scratched glass, sobbing uncontrollably. Mother, they are going to kill me. The men from the syndicate. They found me in the exercise yard yesterday. They said, if you do not unfreeze the trust fund and pay the $5 million, they will break my spine, please. Mother. I am your only son, I looked at Julian. I remembered the little boy whose scraped knees I used to bandage. I remembered the reckless teenager whose massive gambling debts I secretly paid off. And then, I remembered the cold, arrogant man who stood over my hospital bed, threatening to fry my brain with electroshock therapy if I did not sign my own life away. You stopped being my son the moment you locked that asylum door, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any warmth or hesitation. You made a deadly deal with ruthless monsters. Julian, now, you will pay them exactly what you owe, with your own blood. I reached into my sleek leather briefcase. I pulled out 2 thick manila envelopes and slid them through the small metal slot at the bottom of the glass partition. What is this? Arthur asked, staring at the envelopes with wide, terrified eyes. The first envelope contains our final divorce decree. I explained smoothly. I took absolutely everything. The massive estate, the offshore accounts, the vintage cars. You are walking out of this marriage with the exact same thing you brought into it 30 years ago. Absolutely nothing. I turned my cold, unforgiving gaze to my weeping son. The second envelope contains the official restructuring documents for the Sterling Family Trust. I continued. You have been legally and permanently disinherited. Julian, you will never touch a single penny of my empire ever again. You cannot do this to us, Arthur screamed, slamming his heavy fists against the thick glass. We are your family. You were my incredibly expensive mistakes. I corrected him sharply, and I always fix my mistakes. I hung up the heavy black receiver. I did not look back as I walked out of the bleak visiting room. Even through the thick concrete walls, I could hear Julian screaming my name in absolute, helpless terror. It was a beautiful symphony of pure justice. The very next morning, I stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner executive office, looking down at the sprawling, vibrant city. The Sterling Corporation was completely mine again. I had purged the entire board of directors, firing every single coward who had blindly supported Arthur's pathetic coup. The heavy oak doors of my office opened softly. Clara walked in, holding a steaming cup of expensive Earl Grey tea and a thick stack of financial reports. She was no longer wearing a cheap hospital uniform. She wore a sharp, beautifully tailored skirt suit. I had completely paid off her crushing debts and sponsored her full tuition for medical school, until her intense classes began in the autumn. She was my highly paid personal executive assistant. The morning market reports are completely ready, Mrs. Sterling, Clara said with a warm, genuine smile. Thank you, Clara, I replied. Taking the warm porcelain cup, I turned back to the massive windows, feeling the warm morning sun on my face. For decades, I had willingly hidden in the dark shadows. I built massive fortunes, designed brilliant corporate strategies, and let ungrateful, arrogant men take all the shining glory. I sacrificed my own identity to keep my toxic family perfectly intact. But the architect does not hide in the shadows anymore. I took a slow sip of my tea. The massive empire was finally secure. My mind was perfectly sharp, and my ultimate reign had only just begun.